Hey everybody, welcome back to Video Game So today I got a super fun and super exciting video for you guys today because it's one that you asked for down in the comments. I'm going to be doing an exclusive Analogue 3D Turbo Core testing right now, and honestly it's not even called the Turbo Core, that's just what we call it on MiSTer FPGA, but it is so ingrained in my brain when I call it Turbo Core 4 more times in the video, you really can't yell at me. But just so you know, I've dialed up every single overclock setting to the absolute maximum to see exactly what we can get out of Analogue 3D when it comes to N64 games. Before I get too far involved though, do me a huge favor down below, hit like and subscribe and ring that notification bell, definitely helps us out. And if you feel so inclined and want to support the channel, you got a Patreon link down below as well. But right off the top, we're going to jump into GoldenEye 007, maybe the most famous game for the entirety of the N64, because back in the day when this game came out, everyone had it, everyone wanted it, and 4-player deathmatches at friends' house was absolutely something that you played all the way into the wee hours of the night. Now unfortunately, I don't have 3 other players to help me out right now. I am just doing a single player experience because that's kind of how I play games, but you will see right now with all of these enemies on screen at once, and honestly I don't ever remember them grouping up that many times. Everything seems to be running clear near to 60 frames per second. Now of course Analogue 3D unfortunately doesn't have a frame counter, so I can't really tell you exactly what it is. I tried to get a frame counter on with some trickery here, but it basically never actually worked. We just get stuck at 0. So if you know of a way to get a frame counter on N64 games where it won't support it on the hardware, leave me that comment down below. But obviously even without a frame counter, you can clearly tell that this is running way faster than an N64 console would run at, or even the Analogue 3D or MiSTer FPGA would run it at stock speeds. Now as far as its overall performance compared to the actual MiSTer FPGA core, if you want to see that video, I will put these things side by side, but I kind of wanted to just focus on Analogue 3D today. But if you want the TLDR on that one, this is basically doing the exact same thing as the MiSTer Turbo core. If it's running any faster or slower, it would be impossible to tell, because outside of locked off cutscenes, you really have a lot of logic going on in the background as to how the enemies move, how they group up, and that can definitely affect the frame rate. One too many explosions, you're going to tank the frame rate. A couple too many enemies is definitely going to dip down as well. And the reality is, back in the N64 days, developers prioritized graphics over actual frame rate. I'm sure GoldenEye could have ran at 60 frames per second back in the 90s, but it wouldn't have looked this pretty, and considering Nintendo was really hyping up the graphical fidelity or quote-unquote lifelike nature of N64 graphics, it is one of those things that's really not surprising that they went for the screenshot effect versus actually going for the game runs at a decent frame rate effect. Leave me a comment down below and you tell me right now how you feel about the footage and where you think it's clocking it at. I feel like we're kind of hovering around maybe 45 to 50 frames per second persistent. Sometimes you can jump up to 60 frames per second when you're just looking at a wall and turning the camera, and I would say maybe the lows are in the low 40s, maybe even the high 30s when there is an explosion on camera. And let's deal with Nintendo 64's ultimate boss, this damn lock here. We're going to do a soundtrack sample just so you can hear that speeding up the game does not speed up the audio, common misconception, and I'll be right back. Obviously that sounds exactly like GoldenEye should, and that's because it is exactly how GoldenEye should. Speeding up the clocks on the N64 the way it's done on Analogue 3D or MiSTer FPGA will not affect the playback speed of the audio. Let's jump into Mario Kart Amped Up. This is a fun test. Even though it isn't a retail game, it is a full ROM hack, and in my opinion, it is better than the original Mario Kart 64 by a country mile. This is also a game that sees modern innovations and basic improvements as far as how the code runs on N64, because there are more modern tools that developers can use today compared to 1996 and beyond. So it's one of those things. Getting this thing to run at a higher frame rate than stock Mario Kart 64 wouldn't be hard just because people have the expertise of decades of knowledge. But you put this thing on something like Analogue 3D in the highest overclock mode, and you basically are getting almost a persistent 60 frames per second again. This is as smooth as something like Mario Kart Amped Up could ever run. You're definitely not going to get this performance on something like the Nintendo 64 console. And again, if you want to see it compared to MiSTer FPGA, just leave me that comment down below. It is a lot of work, and I want to make sure that people want to see that, considering I've already demoed the Turbo Core pretty extensively on the MiSTer side of things. And you'll see here this game also supports 16:9 widescreen, so this honestly feels more like a modern game with retro graphics than it does anything else. And that is really how good Mario Kart Amped Up is, and if you've never played it before, I can't recommend it enough. Now you are going to have a flash drive to boot this game up because obviously it isn't a retail game, but if you don't have a flash cart and you own an Analogue 3D, I can't recommend one enough. Either the Summer Cart 64 or any of the Everdrive range now work perfectly fine, so it kind of is the sky's the limit on what you want to choose. Now take it from me, if you're not playing this game, you're missing out, and playing it at Analogue 3D is absolutely incredible as far as the speed and frame rate are concerned. Just remember that not every single game is going to see a benefit from actually overclocking it. Some games lock their frame rate to a certain frame rate because of the game logic being tied to it, so you just have to remember that. Let's move into soundtrack sample 2 because the music is that good, and I'll be right back. I mean, Mario Kart just straight up has a great soundtrack in the amped version. It sounds great here coming out of Analogue 3D. But let's move over to a game that I would call unplayable on stock N64 hardware on the stock MiSTer FPGA core and its stock speeds on Analogue 3D. This is Body Harvest, and it's basically kind of like the precursor to Grand Theft Auto 3. This game was just hands down too ambitious for the N64 hardware, and when you're actually playing the open world areas, it is so slow and so bogged down in its own performance that honestly I consider it to be something that isn't fun to play. But here on the actual Analogue 3D, when you're overclocking the ever-loving hell out of everything, it becomes a playable experience. But it's also going to exhibit, at least when we get into the gameplay, that there is no overclock on Analogue 3D, MiSTer FPGA, or any other hardware that's going to give you a locked 60 frames per second experience when the hardware just really isn't up to it. And that is because you can only push the N64 overclock so far before things really do start breaking, because a lot of things involved in actually making this work in FPGA or hardware can be sensitive to too high of clock speeds. It's not like you can just dial it up to 5 GHz and hope everything runs at 60 frames per second. That being said, Body Harvest now runs so much better when you actually overclock it on Analogue 3D, and this would be, in my opinion, the only way I would recommend anyone actually play Body Harvest, because this game on regular hardware, it just chugs and it basically chokes on its own frame rate. It is just an interesting thing. There's a lot of stuff going on in the game world, a lot of large models and a lot of open spaces, and even with that N64 fog, it's one of those things. It was an ambitious idea that definitely was the precursor to stuff like Grand Theft Auto 3. It just really wasn't ready for the hardware that was available. Had this game been held off for something like PlayStation 2, GameCube, or Xbox, I think it would have been as fun of a game and it would have been a lot more enjoyable to play. Because I still remember renting this thing back in the day and wondering to myself if my N64 was actually breaking because it actually just didn't want to seem to run the game whatsoever. Which is to say that, again, I didn't really realize what frame rate was back in the mid to late 90s. I just thought when games weren't running well, that meant that something was wrong with the system. Obviously that isn't the case though, because Body Harvest here on the Analogue 3D overclock core, pushed all the way to the right, definitely runs a lot better. But again, you will see that you're not going to get 60 frames per second out of this. In some areas you might get close, in the cutscenes you definitely can, and in the indoor interior areas you get close as well, but when you still come out into the open, this feels a lot more like a 30 frame per second experience. But trust me, if you've never played Body Harvest on real hardware before, 30 frames per second, kind of getting close to locked, is an absolute revelation when it comes to this title. It makes it fun, it makes it playable, and honestly, when you're driving around killing gigantic bug-like kaiju, it is a game I definitely want to enjoy. Kind of feels a little bit like Earth Defense Force as well before that game ever became a thing, and considering that is one of my favorite ridiculous franchises of all time, this one is definitely one that I've been enjoying playing, whether it's on Analogue 3D Overclocked or my original playthrough last year on the N64 MiSTer FPGA Turbo core. So if you played this one before and you have an Analogue 3D and you thought the first time you played it absolutely sucked performance-wise, go ahead and give it another shot. It's definitely a lot better, but trust me, it's still definitely not going to be a locked 60 frame per second time. Now let's take a look at San Francisco Rush 2049, a game that is definitely way better on Dreamcast than it's going to be on N64. Now that we have the San Francisco Rush PC ports based upon decomps of the arcade versions, there wouldn't be any tangible reason to play this. I absolutely hate when I start a race and somehow crash in the first 2 seconds, but I thought you'd laugh at me for having done just that, trying to get over to that shortcut. this is definitely another game that is going to get a lot more frames per second, because I would say Rush 2049 N64 back in the day bordered on unplayable. It had a decent enough frame rate to be able to enjoy it, but with that lower frame rate came a little bit of weirdness in the overall controls, and because so much of what San Francisco Rush is that physics and handling system of how the cars will move and how they have their own intrinsic weight and kind of momentum behind them, having difficulty steering because the game likes to choke on frames is definitely not a good time. It's also going to be our next soundtrack sample because, again, some fun music, and I really want to dispel the rumor that people have out there that overclocking N64 somehow speeds the audio up. It does not, it never has, and you've heard it here again, so go ahead and listen. I mean, that sounds exactly like Rush 2049 should sound like on the N64, but again, on the Dreamcast it'll just have better audio, and on the PC port from the actual arcade version, even better audio than there. So it really is one of those things on some of these games. Yes, they will run way better than they remember back in the day, but if you don't have a massive amount of nostalgia for Rush 2049, you should probably just play it on Dreamcast or the PC port. But if you do have that nostalgia, this is definitely going to be the best way to play the N64 version of the game, unless you have a MiSTer FPGA. But take it from me, if you want to play 2049, definitely take a look at that new PC port. I will leave a link in the description below. If you want to have an even more fun time, I recommend you play the brand new port of Rush 2069. Now moving over to Legacy of Darkness, this is another game that I would say, at least in the modern era, becomes near borderline unplayable on real N64 hardware or any sort of hardware emulating real N64 clock speeds. But the nice thing is, especially on Overclocked, this game is just going to be so much easier to play. You're going to get way more frames, feeling kind of like in the 45 frame per second category, and it is just going to be that much easier to perform the platforming, because when this game bogged down, it would definitely eat some inputs along with it. You basically feel like you hit the jump button or you hit the hold on button and the game would just absolutely throw you to your death. Now this game still has a little bit of weird logic here and there as far as how you actually grab onto ledges, and you're still going to take an annoying death once or twice, but now it's going to be because the game is fighting you in its logic, and not just because the game feels like it's trying to run through a pool of molasses. That's the thing about these overclocks. They can make games that you didn't think were good actually enjoyable, because if you sit back on an N64 and play Legacy of Darkness today, it can be a challenging experience, but you kind of want to stick with it because it is a very fun game. But when you actually get it to run at an acceptable level, suddenly you realize it's way better than you thought it was just because you weren't fighting it. It's also our last soundtrack sample of the video, so go ahead and listen, and I'll be right back with more. The game is absolutely going to troll you with some cheap deaths, and I forgot that that one platform was there because it's been maybe like 3 or 4 years since I actually sat down and played Legacy of Darkness. But you will see those darker areas are the areas of the map that are going to fall out the minute you touch them, so you have to jump at the exact right time and hope that you don't end up getting knocked into the lava unfairly. Trust me, Legacy of Darkness might be more fun with more frames, but it is still going to absolutely kill you and annoy you here and there. But I would say of all the turbo tests in this video, the one that I enjoy the best is obviously going to be GoldenEye 007, because it is an incredible game. It's one of the best games on N64, and getting this frame rate out is absolutely outstanding. I don't know how the hell I missed this shot 4 times in a row, but I love that he didn't even react when he shot his hat off when he's down there just absolutely dropping his steam and dumper. Well, we'll see you guys next time. Leave me some test requests down below, and I hope you guys enjoyed the video. Bye-bye.